Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's panel discussion on the topic Do All Roads Lead to Paris? We will explore how the perceived need for more regulation is shaping voluntary carbon initiatives and natural capital using the Paris Agreement in background. This will be a 60-minute discussion, and we'll allocate some time towards the end to take some questions. Please feel free to type them in the chat box. This live stream is being recorded and broadcast on our YouTube channel as well as on our X and LinkedIn accounts. So my name is Chams. I'm leading the carbon finance activities at dClimate, a global climate data infrastructure provider and a carbon markets facilitator. And I'll be your moderator today for this exciting discussion. So let's kick things off by introducing our esteemed panelists. So today we have Mercedes Garcia Madero, Chief Implementation Officer at Alcott. We have Charlotte Lehmann, Senior Investment Director, Head of Carbon Finance at Mirova, and Greg Litka Morris, Policy Manager at Abatable. Thanks for all of you for joining us today. So let's start. And we'd like to ask a very simple question so that our audience understand a little bit more what is at stake today. But the question we have is, what are voluntary carbon projects and what we also call natural capital initiatives? Maybe Mercedes, you can start providing some definition and background.
Thank you so much, Sam. It will be an easy question because it's my role to develop carbon projects, but it's not easy because there are many ways to develop carbon projects. But in my opinion, a carbon project shall have different components. The first one is the mitigation of climate change. For sure, all the carbon projects will reduce the carbon emissions in the atmosphere. Second component is that all the carbon projects will have environmental integrity and should be aligned with environmental and social safeguards. The third point is that all the carbon projects, in my opinion, should be aligned with the national policies on climate change in the country and protecting the human rights in the communities, for sure. You need to involve communities since the beginning. And last topic is to create a fair carbon price to be sold in the market. I think this is my summary of what is a carbon project.
Thank you, Mercedes. Charlotte, from a investment perspective, what is the typical or standard definition?
Yeah, like Mercedes was saying, it's not an easy question, even though it's part of our job, obviously. But it's not easy because it's a very fragmented market and very fragmented. You have different ways to see and to develop carbon project. But I would complement maybe on what Mercedes was just saying is what is also important on our side, and I will be more on the investor side. What is really important also is the co-benefits. So the co-benefits towards the social co-benefits, the nature co-benefits, the biodiversity additional benefits that also a carbon project could add to the equation, and also in order to measure all types of impact, because we are not under a carbon project not only focusing on climate impact, but all the other impact that notably Mercedes mentioned, the social impact, the biodiversity impact, and the way we see the carbon project being developed, we see this as a combination of all those different aspects that put together would be insurance of quality and integrity in all of those different aspects. And the point that Mercedes also mentioned with regards to local implementation, regional or national involvement, or being included into a local or a national framework is also key in order to avoid any potential problems that could arise throughout the life of the development or implementation of a carbon project. That would be, in a nutshell, what a carbon project would mean from an investor perspective, I would guess.
So no, thank you. So what I hear is that a carbon project has more than just carbon mitigation in there, correct? And the focus on these voluntary initiatives is to contribute to co-benefits. Can you give us a very simple example of a social co-benefit that a project can bring to local communities? Mercedes? Yeah, Mercedes.
Yes, of course. And before that, I would like to add that carbon projects, I mean, the carbon is like the financial vehicle to implement good projects with high quality. It's a financial tool that we are using to implement long-term and sustainable projects in 30, 50 years. And regarding your project co-benefits, for example, in a conservation project, imagine that you have a forest and the main driver of deforestation is the illegal logging because the communities need wood for cooking, so they need the wood for life. So you need to do capacity building for the communities to look for alternative livelihoods that avoid cutting the trees, because they have an alternative life without cutting the trees. So maybe cook stores because they are reducing the wood. Maybe they can create alternative of sustainable agriculture or cattle, different activities that avoid the communities go inside the forest to cut the trees. This is like the co-benefits that you can implement using the carbon credits as a financial tool. For example, I would like to add another example. In a mangrove restoration project, for example, a good co-benefit that is really useful in this kind of project is to create cooperatives for fishing. The fishermen, sometimes they don't have the means to sell the products in the market or even in the international market. So if you are using this kind of projects to create cooperatives that empower the communities to have the means to sell the products outside the region, you are empowering them using the carbon project as a tool.
Yeah, and maybe, sorry. So, emphasize what Mercedes was just saying about this tool, because effectively, and this answered your question as well, that carbon is not the finality or the objective of this carbon project or this regeneration or conservation project that we are all trying to see emerge from this new asset class. The carbon credits or the carbon is only the tool that would enable to foster capital, private capital, public capital, towards the initiatives, the local initiatives, the projects, etc., that would enable to effectively have this project emerge, finance regeneration, conservation of nature, and this is what we are trying to do, is to maximize this fostering of cash into these projects.
Now, thank you, Mercedes and Charlotte. And this is a great overview of what voluntary carbon initiatives are. Moving on to the concept of regulated carbon markets, and we touched earlier on developing a project within a country's framework. What does it actually mean to have these initiatives under a regulatory framework? And if some examples can be given. Greg, maybe you want to chime in here?
Yeah, sure. I think sort of building on what was mentioned in both the initial answers, we talked about the kind of mitigation outcomes of voluntary projects having to actually have an impact. And actually, historically in the voluntary market, a lot of projects haven't really been accounted for what they're achieving at a national level. And with the Paris Agreement and the development of all countries having NDC targets, it's important that these projects are within a national framework and contributing towards countries' NDC achievements. And we're seeing various different mechanisms at national, regional, international levels that are kind of going to support or ensure that these projects are achieving the the goals of the Paris Agreement. And perhaps the biggest initiative we're seeing is the development of Article 6 under the Paris Agreement, and this aligns carbon market activity with NDC achievement, and essentially governs around preventing double claiming of credit achievement if the mitigation outcome transfers from one country to another country. And this is achieved through the accounting mechanism of corresponding adjustments, which means as a credit is transferred from one country to another, the credit is removed from the NDC or the national inventory of the host country of the project and contributes towards the host country, the buyer country. And to receive a corresponding adjustment, the credit needs to have received a letter of authorization from the host country to have been transferred and removed from its NDC. And several mechanisms are being built under Article 6 around this. We generally talk about Article 6.2 and Article 6.4. Article 6.2 is a decentralized system which allows for bilateral or multilateral trades between countries. And really it's up to the countries of that agreement to define the rules, what project types, for instance, can and cannot be traded within that agreement. So we think of Switzerland or Singapore as two countries that have signed a lot of 6.2 agreements. And actually the projects that you see traded and the forms of trade between Switzerland and, say, Thailand is very different to what we might see eligible between Singapore and Rwanda, for instance. And 6.2 is a lot more operational. 6.4 will be a more centralized system overseen by the UN. The UN will define methodologies that are approved under 6.4, and that could form almost a global carbon market. But at this moment in time, very little progress. Well, progress has been made, but not enough progress for a market to really develop. We don't know what methodologies will be eligible under 6.4, so we can't really start developing projects in alignment with that at this point. But the influence of Article 6 and these letters of authorizations is starting to bleed through into other mechanisms and into other voluntary projects. So, for instance, the CORSIA scheme, which oversees international aviation, requires the credits that airlines will purchase to comply with the CORSIA scheme as part of phase 1 to have corresponding adjustments, although they'll be using voluntary standards. Likewise, we're seeing the development of domestic compliance schemes for countries to support their achievement as part of their strategy to achieve their NDC. And these are often using carbon credits as part of this. So Singapore, as we mentioned earlier, has a carbon tax which allows the use of international credits from countries they have a 6.2 agreement with and requires a corresponding adjustment. Separately, some countries such as Brazil are developing an emission trading scheme which will use only domestic carbon credits to help achieve it. So again, it's driving changes in these supply and demand dynamics, but regulatory frameworks have to be built around this, and countries are really building these from scratch and without much best practice to guide them, which does bring some challenges.
Now that's very, very clear. And how far do you think we are in coming to a resolution under this infamous Article 6 and 6.4, 6.2?
Well, 6.2 is pretty operational. You know, there's this sort of administrative and fine-tuning elements that still need to be finalized and are being finalized. But you know, agreements are being formed and mechanisms are starting to act, and the internationally traded mitigation outcomes that are the carbon credits of these schemes are being traded. 6.4 is, well, a little, as we said, uncertain. Hopefully there'll be a lot of resolution at this year's COP, and there'll be work going on in the background by the supervisory body through the year that should really help us establish enough of a framework to begin developing that market. But really, it was quite a surprise that the enough of an outline of 6.4 wasn't developed at the previous COP to allow market stakeholders to begin to operationalize behind that. And the process seem to become quite politicized, which makes it challenging. And so there's clearly issues there that need to be ironed out before the process can move forward.
Thank you. So it seems that there's still some, some time ahead of us before we get some final resolution. I understand 6.2 countries are, signed bilateral agreements. Some projects were stamped as Article 6.2 compliance. But when it comes to this, what you mentioned about the 6.4 and the global carbon market, there's still work to be done, which is a good segue to our next question. So in practical terms, then, what does it mean from a project development perspective, from an investor perspective? Are projects currently being implemented under the premise of being compliant with regulations or governance frameworks such as Article 6, the Corsia schemes, or the Singapore, what we call the domestic tax, carbon tax regime? So if we can maybe go into detail from, Mercedes, Charlotte, and we want to know if that prevents you from developing project, raising funds, and what it means on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Tom. And the short answer is yes, definitely. If we are using carbon credits as a financial tool, we need to be aligned with the different needs that the buyers are requiring. So we are developing projects from the project developer point of view, we always start with the different components that I defined previously, which is mitigation component and alignment with the NDC. We start all the projects trying to analyze the policy in the country in terms of NDC and what are the goals of the country for mitigate carbon emission. If not, it doesn't make sense. So we align all the projects with the host country regulation, but also with the buyer's regulation. There are different markets, as you mentioned, Corsia, GETA, VCM, and everything, but all of them, in my opinion, they have the main goal of Paris Accord, reducing 1.5 degrees of global warming, and with integrity, with environmental integrity, with community engagement, and with transparency. And as project developer, we are developing projects with these pillars from the beginning, from the project idea node. We involve the communities, we align the projects with the climate national policies, we use robust and credible standards to calculate carbon reduction and to design the monitoring plans to be implemented during the whole creating period. And we are aligned with the most relevant international standards, of course. And the main question is to assure the transparency in all the projects. In my opinion, it's key to show the investor that the project is designed since the beginning with transparency and with clear data of mitigation, community, social, environmental integrity, and high quality is the key. And in the last year, we need to involve technology to assure that transparency, that avoidance of double counting, and that alignment with the national policy.
Yeah, I mean, Mercedes said most of it, so I will not have a lot to add. And I think we are completely, aligned in the way to assess, and our side, the way to assess the project in which we invest, and on Mercedes side in the way they implement or they structure the project or they design the project that they develop. And we are totally aligned because in the journey of either developing a carbon project or investing into a carbon project, it's a very long journey. There's a lot of steps that needs to be checked. And you mentioned the word transparency, Mercedes, and it's very, very important on the investor side. And transparency, certainty as much as possible in terms of notably you mentioned the word double counting, which is clear, and this is what has been also developed by Greg around this, to ensure that anything that would come out from the project would be would be also something that is transparent, clear, certain, and cannot be jeopardized at any point in time. So in the implementation, fully agree with what Mercedes was saying with regards to inclusion into a local framework, ensuring as much as possible compliance with NDC, and to ensure that there's no risk of changing items that could jeopardize the implementation of the project. But so on the design implementation, clear. And also what's important and what we are doing at Mirova is that we are doing extra diligence as well on top of what is already done at the project level, in order to ensure that not only the design of the project has been well thought, well designed, etc., but also throughout the implementation phase. Because here we're talking about nature project, biomass regeneration. It's not a 5-year project. It's usually very long-term project. So we're talking about 20, 30, 40 years. So we need to ensure the permanency of the impact as well, and all the permanency of all the items that was part of the initial design, in order to ensure that this permanency is achieved, is monitored. And that's why also we have this diligence and this action, and we work in partnership with the project developer, the local implementer, in order to achieve this permanency, this transparency, quality, integrity, all those words that we already mentioned several times.
Can I just jump in there, Shams, with a
absolutely, absolutely. The floor is yours, Greg.
Thanks. I think just kind of thinking about it logically, it would make sense for project proponents to start thinking about developing their projects so that they can align with these compliance schemes. I mean, the voluntary market's had a difficult couple of years, and demand has been up and down, and some prices have dipped in some project types. So if you can create a project where your credits can be sold into a compliance market, that's a kind of guaranteed pool of demand, be it because you're selling to aviation. We've modeled abatable that I think 100 to 200 million credits will be required to achieve phase 1 of CORSIA in the next few years, or because you're going to be able to sell your credits into Singaporean companies who require it for the carbon tax, then it's sort of a no-brainer to go and jump the hurdles that are required to be able to trade into these schemes. So for instance, with CORSIA, do try and get a letter of authorization from the host country so that your project can trade into CORSIA and capture that demand, rather than be susceptible to demand dipping in the voluntary market, however much you've worked on defining really good quality aspects of your projects.
No, thanks. And it's good that you're touching on this, because that was my next question, because we're talking about regulatory framework, regulations, but we've mentioned a few times compliance markets. Do you, Greg, can you, for our audience, quickly describe the difference between a voluntary and a compliance market, and how, if it's true actually that a Article 6 framework or a CORSIA would fall under the definition of a compliance market?
Sure. I mean, the difference is somewhat in the name between voluntary and compliance. A voluntary project or a voluntary market is defined by, say, on the demand side, companies are purchasing these carbon credits because of their own back, by their own choice, not because of any regulation that forces them to, versus a compliance market where, say, you are reporting your emissions and required by law to in some way compensate for your emissions. And that can happen in many ways. It can be a carbon price, such as a carbon tax, or an emission trading scheme that has emission allowances, but also, as I said, these schemes are allowing carbon credits into them, which means that these once voluntary credits are now usable by entities to meet their compliance obligations. I mean, Article 6, you would have to, let's say it's more rule-based voluntary activity. I mean, theoretically, there's no regulation forcing anyone to take part in Article 6, but you might be part of a compliance scheme, as we touched upon, that has elements of the Article 6 mechanisms. We talked about these letters of authorization that you require to get a corresponding adjustment if you are to purchase these credits in the Singapore carbon tax, which is a compliance scheme. So it's sort of this hybrid mechanism. Similarly, CORSIA for airlines that have signed up, well, I mean, it's still, phase 1 is is going on right now, and theoretically it's voluntary, and phase 2 will actually be a compliance scheme whereby all aviation under nations that have signed up will have to retire eligible credits to meet their requirements. The interesting thing about CORSIA, I think, at the moment is that although that's kind of causing a lot of discussion in the market about how it might change demand or drive a lot of demand, is actually it's up to the party or the nation that the airline sits under to decide the punishment if they don't meet their CORSIA requirement. And at the moment, we've not seen any nation actually set out any punitive rules. So it will be very interesting to see how compliance actually works with the CORSIA phase 1 scheme.
That's the fine line there, how you're going to kind of punish, like you said, counterparties that are not in compliance with their governing regime. No, thanks. We're going to continue. We hope the audience is enjoying. Just wanted to remind everyone that is attending that you can ask questions here in the comments section. You can also, from the people watching on X, you can ask your questions sending a message at dClimate DAO, and if we have any questions, we'll take them towards the end. So we've taken a look at what projects are, what a regulatory framework looks like. But from what I'm hearing, and that came again from you, Greg, regarding Article 6, is we're talking more about a framework. So the question that I have is whether these initiatives need regulation and global governance, or is there just a need for, or a greater need for, standardization across the board? And the floor is all yours. I'm going to mute myself and listen to you guys.
Okay,
Mercedes, if you want to start.
Yes, I'm always starting, but of course, no, definitely, in my opinion, rules are needed, definitely. And I would like to illustrate it with an example. If I go to the supermarket and I'm going to choose some food, I will look at the ingredients label, and all the ingredients will be transparently included in the label, and a projection per 100 grams should be included in that line, that I can compare between two labels, two different products, and I can compare the ingredients. So in my opinion, carbon market is more or less the same. The buyers and the developer, the buyers should have the label of the ingredients of the project in a transparent and clear way to have a better decision how to invest in which project. And my role as project developer is to create the best label with the high quality ingredients, with the transparent information, with the fair price, and with all the information put in the label of my project. So I think it's the same, and that label should be aligned. I don't know if it is standardization or global governance, but at least rules should be the same, and all the project developers, all the standards, and all the markets should be aligned in the principles of Paris Accord, in my opinion. It's the same: double counting, transparency, mitigation of climate change, governance, community engagement, and rights of human rights. Sorry, yes, human rights defense.
Yeah, and maybe on this question, again, agreeing with what Mercedes was saying, and but I will add something that maybe by standardization or regulation, I'm not sure that we can have one single market for all the carbon components or all these tools that we are using and all these carbon credits. So because all the projects are different by essence. I mean, comparing a conservation project versus a mangrove project versus an agroforestry project, they all have different components. They all have different impact. I mean, social impact, it's not exactly the same depending on the localization of the project, the methodology, the existence of the social dimension before the project is being implemented. So, and that's just an example. I just took the social one, but you have that on all the components of the project. So therefore, agree to compare what things can be compared, with each other. So it's clear, and as part of what is, quality, integrity, transparency, inclusion into this global framework, etc. But having one single, carbon price for all the carbon project is something that maybe is not achievable, and maybe it's not necessary. And a good example, and this is something we've already discussed among others, is for instance the wine market, where you have different type of wine, and nobody can say there's no wine market, even though all wine have a specific price depending on where they are being planted, where they are being maybe put into maturity, etc. All the combination used to assemble the wines, and you don't need to have one single wine price. You can have, bearing in mind that even though you have different prices, so different, and that does not also jeopardize potential liquidity. And by liquidity, I mean investment potential from external going directly to the project. So liquidity, one single price is not necessary, but what we need is a framework on which we have certainty. And from an investor perspective, certainty, or at least mitigation from the risk that we mentioned, regulation risk, development risk, implementation risk, etc. All things that can help mitigate those risks will favor, first on our side, to raise financing and to raise commitment in order to foster this commitment to the project and to create this supply, basically, and finance project and finance impact on the ground. And this will help us rather than just one single market, one where everything would be commingled or mixed into something that we will not be able to, to value one project compared to the other, taking into account some specific points that are obviously clear on one project, but maybe not on the other one, not because it's not done, because it doesn't make any sense to push for a biodiversity monitoring plan very hard if there's no biodiversity loss specifically in this region, for instance. And that's just one example. All the components can have the same analysis.
It's very, very interesting having the perspective of project developer and the investor side. In terms of policy standards, frameworks, Greg, how do you see things coming into play here?
Well, I agree with both the points. I think regulation can help develop this market now from the voluntary stage and help it mature. I also agree with Charlotte that we don't want a single commodity price for carbon, and that every project is unique and has its own benefits, and every buyer is viewing projects differently. What is quality to them? Perhaps to look at it from the slightly more compliant perspective, I think the fact that we are starting to develop some mechanisms that can form standardization, the benefit there is that it brings a flow of capital in that sense to some elements of standardization. It's not that scalable to have every buyer in the market having to spend months and months doing due diligence and working out which credits are kind of important to them, and checking through them. So if you are, say, compliant with the CORSIA scheme, you can purchase a contract, a standardized contract that is eligible to CORSIA and meets your obligations there, and brings a transparent sort of floor price to CORSIA, and that could start to develop around other things. You might see a contract around a Singapore carbon tax, as we mentioned earlier. There may be other elements, and I'm sure the exchanges are working on them as we speak around what other contracts, standardized contracts, they can develop. I think having some level of standardization really helps buyers navigate this market, which ultimately allows the flow of capital to move more quickly, and then we can scale and have the biggest impact, as long as obviously these regulated markets and compliance schemes that we've developed are of the highest quality. So I think standardization around high quality benchmarks, say the ICVCM core carbon principles we touched upon, or CORSIA as the technical advisory body is in charge of assessing what is eligible into that, would be helpful to the market to grow now.
No, that's clear, and personally, I believe also that it's hard to ask for one single carbon price, because each project has its own merits. With that being said, investors like certainty, and they like confidence also. So having too many standards, too many rules that are not aligned may also bring some nuisance and limit in capital flows. But the good thing is we're still seeing projects being developed thanks to project developers like Alcott's, thanks to investors like Mirova, with the oversight of policymakers and organizations such as Abatable. Um, Maybe as we draw towards the conclusion, maybe let's revisit our main question. Obviously, everyone understood the different puns in our initial question. Do all roads lead to Paris? We have the Olympics coming up in a few weeks. We have the infamous adage that all roads lead to Rome. So the question is, based on our discussion, what are your thoughts? I mean, can Article 6, which is under the Paris Agreement, can this be seen as the holy grail of voluntary carbon markets and natural capital? Again, Mercedes, please feel free to start.
Thank you, Tom. In my opinion, all the roads will lead to Paris. Definitely, because it's the first time that almost 200 parties have signed an agreement to fight against climate change, global warming, and all of the parties have a clear idea that we need to fight against, and we need to reduce the global warming by 1.5. So independently of it is CORSIA or ICVCM or Article 6.4 or 6.2, all of the roads should lead to Paris Agreement for sure. But the situation now is not all the roads are going in the same way. They are easy roads, are not as easy roads, and we are taking different ways of understanding the same thing, that is reducing the global warming. So I think we need to work all the agents together. I need to involve communities, because sometimes we are focused on discussing about Article 6.4, 6.2, and the cookstoves are over creating 1 tons of CO2 per cookstove instead of 2, and the community doesn't care about that. They are the main impacted people in the market, and we need to work together and involve the community since the beginning in the discussion. We cannot define the rules in the developed countries without taking into account the South, the global South, because they have the power in the market nowadays. I think the market is from the sellers, and we need to work with the sellers in the definition of the rules. So yes, all the roads should lead to Paris, and all of the agents should work together to define a good path to obtain the goal, who is reducing 1.5 degrees.
Yeah, I think again the question is should be whether or not it should lead to Paris, and I think definitely it should. It's not does. I mean, will all roads lead to Paris? I mean, all roads should, as Mercedes was saying, also should lead to Paris, for all the reasons that we mentioned for this discussion, but also because it's not. I mean, we shouldn't take the fact that there is no regulation, that the Article 6, 6.2, 6.4, and mostly 6.4 is not clear yet. Compliance versus the voluntary market is not, completely clear, and fungibility of the two is not clear also. We shouldn't take that as excuse for inaction, basically. Inaction on the ground, and notably what Mercedes was saying with regards to communities, and but also inaction from, regeneration of nature. And this is the purpose. The purpose of what we are doing at Mirova is finance project with this objective: regeneration and conservation of nature. And again, putting on the side that everything that we consider around carbon is only a tool. It's not the final purpose. The initial purpose is financing a financing project that would regenerate and are scalable enough in order to have the biggest impact on all the different elements that we already mentioned, social, etc. So yes, it should lead to Paris, and it's not an excuse if everything is not set yet for inaction. We need to act globally. I mean, all the people around the table, but also the investors, everyone should effectively not take that as an excuse, basically.
I think I generally agree. Yes, all roads should lead to Paris, because that is ultimately, for a global challenge, that is the global target, and that's how we collectively are trying to prevent climate change. And we have built this market to have impact rather than just to build another financial market. It's a solution. But maybe to continue with the theme of the title, the road is bumpy, and it might not be all roads leading to Paris immediately. I think just by the fact we have all these structural changes going on in the carbon market, say compliance schemes, consider potentially ongoing Article 6 developments, really changing the way the voluntary market operates. A few years ago, we didn't even talk about letters of authorization. Now you wouldn't really set up a project without thinking about it. It's one of the first questions is, what's the likelihood of this being allowed? Countries developing national regulation around carbon markets and aligning them with their NDC targets just shows how much all of this is becoming aligned with Paris. But I think certainly in the short term, before regulation is fully established, and as companies continue to operate outside of compliance schemes, we'll still see a thriving voluntary carbon market that hopefully has, say, with initiatives such as CCPs or other elements, companies can still purchase credits from projects that have fantastic quality characteristics, and that can be defined by them as well as the project, right? So we may have standards in the market or whatever that define the quality features, but also a buyer may want a credit with certain SDGs or within its supply chain in some way, or different elements and characteristics that are important to them. So I think it's all aligning towards Paris, but there's still elements of a voluntary market that are very important and will continue to thrive.
So what I hear is that Article 6 is like Thanos, it's inevitable. So
yes, I mean the only, I think there was maybe almost a bit of, not arrogance, but there was surprise when things fell away at COP last year. I think we thought there'd be some more agreements from the negotiations at COP last year, and that didn't happen. So that obviously puts an element of uncertainty. So never say never, but I think it might be helpful if things built towards a single global carbon market at some point.
all right, great, thank you. So we have a bit of time to take some questions before we wrap everything up. So we have our first question here.
Happy to
go ahead.
pick this one up. So yes, I think is the answer. There'll be more legislation being put in place by different governments to manage their carbon markets and to align with Article 6, and that is creating some challenging regulatory risks in the market at the moment. Should we say, I mean, Indonesia being the obvious example of how overnight credits were banned from being exported whilst they worked out how they would align their NDCs with carbon projects. But I think we're probably in the process where increasingly domestic legislation will be or is being developed. I think that's going to take some time. So I think there might be a few challenges along the way with that. As we've mentioned, I think I touched earlier that there's not really a best practice. There's not a set rule book that can be followed. So policymakers are having to kind of work this one out as they go, and they might not necessarily have fantastic experience in carbon markets and knowledge to be developing these policies. So it could be a bit of a tricky process in some instances, but I think ultimately we'll see more development. Perhaps I can touch on revocations if you want, Chance, but I don't know if we want to open that door a little. Okay, I'll just say that I think at the moment, very quickly, I'll just say the market is now pushing legislation or pushing for letters of authorization as a safeguard quicker than policymakers can legislate, and that is building this risk that policymakers are starting to give out letters of authorization without fully aligning their NDCs and setting up their market regulations and having national inventories that are capturing all the mitigation outcomes. And that's presenting this risk that while I may purchase a credit with a letter of authorization today, down the line, if that country hasn't properly thought through their strategy, they miss their NDC target, they revoke that, that is a major risk in the market, given the amount that these correspondingly adjusted credits are now being implemented into compliance schemes.
Thank you. I think we have another question. We have time for 2 more questions.
Yeah, so I think the question was is for me. So yeah, it's not a straightforward answer, because I would say it depends on the project and on the actual involvement of the communities, notably what we mentioned about the there's project where there's a real impact at the community level, and there's other where this impact, potential social impact, is relatively lower. But we used to. I mean, long story short, and the quick answer is it's definitely an important part of our decision process, and also in the way we structure the transaction and the way we structure the investment of and the way we structure the project financing that we will convey to the project. We will ensure that there's alignment of incentive from all the stakeholders, and that there is a fair, and this is a point that Mercedes, a word that Mercedes used at the beginning of this conversation, is the fair price, or the fair return that is shared fairly among the different stakeholders. And definitely we try to partner with the project developer, with the local implementer, which is usually the one that is liaising with the communities in order to build a financing with a fair distribution of the price, of the value, I would say, of this tool, which is the carbon credits or carbon component that will be extracted and on which we leverage our investment. In terms of the financial return, I mean, the mandates that currently Mirova have is less a financial type of a strategy, but more in-kind type of strategy, where the investor that have given us the mandate to invest into this project would not ask for a financial return, but a return in kind. So with the impact, but also with this tool that we were mentioning, extracting from the project. So therefore, there is, and we tend to say that we have a real patient and a non-speculative approach towards the carbon prices. And that's why also we are structuring this hand in hand with the project developer, the local implementer, and us, in order to make this achievable. Because once again, we're not talking about a 5-year investment. We're talking about very long-term investment. And so if we want to ensure that this project, or the regeneration of the throughout the years, we need to have everyone on board. All the stakeholders need to be aligned and to be okay to continue this adventure for quite a long time. So yes, definitely this is part of our investment process and our decision process. And we will not go into financing a project where one element or one stakeholder is not clearly aligned towards this the achievement of all the impacts that we already mentioned with regards to this specific project.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was very thorough. There's time for one last question.
I think I can take this one as well, Shams. There's actually a second part I've read which mentioned about the importance of double claiming within country NDCs, and why voluntary carbon markets are blurring with these compliance schemes, which require corresponding adjustments. I think probably the crucial thing to note here is that Paris sets targets for all countries, whereas under the Kyoto Protocol, not all countries had reduction targets. And so all countries have to consider how they're meeting their targets. And therefore, if there is international trading of mitigation outcomes, of carbon reductions or removals, then that has to be properly accounted for to ensure integrity, that the impact of the reduction is only being counted in, as we mentioned, the buyer countries' national inventory and NDC, and removed from the host countries. So that's why the corresponding adjustment is so crucial as a part of these compliance schemes, because all these compliance schemes are being set up by countries in order to achieve their NDC.
Thank you, Greg. I think this is getting to the end. So before we wrap things up, each of you, if you want to, tell our audience where they can find more information on your respective organizations, the projects you're working on, the investments that are being made or that were made, and on the policy reports, for example, for available. So we'll start with Mercedes, and then we'll wrap things up.
Thank you so much, Sam. Well, in our website, they can contact us, and we have a pipeline of projects, and we are more than happy to share all the information about alcohol development and also related to fair price. Only to say that we are working in a fair carbon price alliance, trying to analyze which is fair for all the parties and the communities to the buyer perspective. So happy to share all the information about that and about our projects in our website. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It was a very interesting conversation, and thank you for the questions. And obviously, I mean, I'm available also offline through LinkedIn or through you can find me directly or through Mirova website if you want to have more information on what we do and especially on the project that we finance and how we finance and have and continue the conversation with regards to how we integrate co-benefits, how we integrate communities in the structuring of our investment and yeah, thank you very much for this and enjoy the event. Thanks.
Thanks as well. I guess just to finish it off, really interesting discussion. And if people want to learn more about Abatable, we've got, and then through our website and LinkedIn, there's loads of information, but they can also reach out to me directly on LinkedIn to discuss. And we've got a market intelligence product, which is helping to navigate all these uncertainties in the market around policy and other risk areas, and also a monthly newsletter, the Carbon Compass, that gives updates on everything going on in the market. So I recommend signing up to that.
All right, cool. So on behalf of dClimate, I'd like to thank you, all the panelists, for your contributions. Thank you to our audience for participating and engaging with us today. If you have any further questions or need more information, please feel free to reach out after the session, which is going to be available online through dClimate's YouTube channel, LinkedIn, and X accounts. And to finish up, ultimately, while some standardization and regulation may be needed, with Article 6 being the holy grail of global governance, it's important to note that there are still carbon projects out there that are being developed. So let's continue working together towards our shared goals in the carbon markets and natural capital initiatives. Thanks again, and have a great day.